Good morning or good evening to everyone who is listening today. And I'm very excited and honored actually to be invited to speak today to the EdCamp Global Hangout. And I just we're in Oakville, Ontario today and at a school where a number of kids stayed overnight and have been up almost 24 hours. And so it's going to be an interesting day, I'm sure, at school for the kids and the teachers as they finish over the next couple of hours here, this amazing interactive community that has been put online by the teachers and facilitators of EdCamp Global. I'm very, very excited about this. We're going to talk today about a couple of things. So my name is Dave Rogers, and I am a founder and CEO of a company called AmpSolar Group. And before we get to kind of what we do and some of the exciting projects that I want to talk to you about today, we're going to kind of take a step back and talk about the problem. And because I think what's really important is for all of you in this forum and global community is to think about what you want to do for the rest of your lives. Because I think what you'll hear from me today is that some things have inspired me and have made me dedicate kind of the rest of my life to changing the world. And I think what's really, really important and some of the things that we have at AmpSolar Group, which is the company that I founded, is do what you love. That's a mantra that we have, and we've got posters all over the office, and we encourage and inspire all of our employees and partners to do what they love. And so what's really important is when you start a business or you start an idea or you get inspired is you've got to start typically with a problem, and you're trying to solve that problem. And the problem that I've been involved with for the last 10 years or so is climate change. And so today we're going to talk about the problem, but more importantly, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is the solution. And hopefully you leave here with the fact that there's a lot of hope and that, sorry, just going to get technology up and running here, and that there is hope for the future. And that there's advancements in technology, there's advancements in people and innovation happening all over the world every single day. And what's happening is that the rapid increase in climate change is being combated by the rapid increase in technology and innovation and thought leadership through a number of leaders in the world. And so what I'd like to do now is turn to the presentation here. So we're going to talk about, again, we're going to talk about really what is the problem. So what is climate change? We're going to talk about just an understanding and some kind of pictures of what are the effects of climate change. We're going to talk also about what are some of the global initiatives on fighting climate change today. We're going to talk about what is the role of renewable energy in that fight against climate change. And then we're going to talk specifically around solar energy and solar projects and some of the things that AmpSolar is doing, both on the solar side as well as creating net zero communities. And then also talk about, just in the end here, building the future that you want to live in. And so let's get right to it. So, a lot of people talk about climate change, and I'm sure that most of you are taught some type of climate change in the classroom. And here's kind of a picture of, I say it's my son and daughter talking about climate change. They're saying, they're talking about it on TV the other day, and the boy says, of course, it's something to do with the weather. Let's see what it means and how do we fight it? So this is a quote from David Suzuki, who, as you hopefully all know, is a very, very well-known and renowned combatter, if you will, of climate change from Canada. And really what it is, it's a serious problem. Most people think of it and know it as something to do with industrial pollution, changing weather patterns, and car exhaust. And really, in a nutshell, climate change occurs when long-term weather patterns are altered. And for example, through human activity, global warming is one part of climate change, and it's kind of one measure of climate change, and it's a rise in the average global temperature of the Earth. And so we'll talk a bit about what is global warming. And so if you think about our Earth, the Earth is heated, from the sun. And so as the sun rays hit the Earth's atmosphere and then the planet, what happens is through greenhouse gas emissions, through cars polluting, through the deforestation and also through industrial pollution, what happens is those greenhouse gases create a barrier in the Earth's atmosphere that as the sun's rays hit the Earth and the Earth warms up, that warmth should, as of course you all know, warm air rises, it should rise and go into the atmosphere. But what happens is greenhouse gases capture that warm air and keep it on the Earth's surface. And what that does globally is that it warms the Earth's surface. And so that's that's the big issue with global warming. And that's what you're hearing about, hopefully, when you're listening to some of the things that are happening in the news around the average temperature around the world rising to above 2 degrees Celsius, which most people believe can have severe and dire effects on the Earth. And so that's, in a nutshell, what global warming is. So we then now got to think about, okay, what does that really mean, though, to the world and to the Earth? Because it really does affect not just us, but it affects all human activity, all animals, all vegetation, et cetera. And so what you do see is, because of climate change, you see changing rain and snow patterns, which is changing weather patterns, which creates much stronger storms, which also creates changes in animal migration and life cycles. You see higher temperatures and more heat waves. And because of that, you see more droughts and wildfires. You see less snow and ice. You see some thawing permafrost. And what that does to things like corals and animal behaviors is quite profound. And then you see rising sea levels and warmer oceans, et cetera. And so this is the effects that climate change and global warming have on the Earth. So here's just some pictures of things that are happening all around us. This is a river system in Manitoba that was flooded in 2014. If you look at that, the river is just flooding everything around, all the vegetation around the riverbanks, which is obviously quite a big problem. You then see here's downtown Calgary in Alberta, and the Bow River, which kind of runs through the city, completely flooding a lot of the downtown Calgary area. That was in 2013. And then you've got, Hurricane Katrina, which happened, over 10 years ago now. Some of you probably have heard of Katrina. It was a massive disaster and really flooded most of New Orleans. And so things like this is happening all around us. Every single day you'll see different weather patterns affecting, whether it's flooding or whether it's those storms being much more severe. You're seeing now a lot of planes in the last just couple of weeks experiencing massive turbulence as they're in the air because of some of the weather patterns and the winds coming in. And so that's what's happening because of climate change. You look at, we all, love animals, and if you here's a great example of some of the things that are, as far as affecting our wildlife and habitats. I mean, you see the elephant, sitting there in a very, very dry and dusty climate, no water, et cetera. You see the polar bear, which is an interesting shot. The polar bear typically has ice all around it to go and hunt and to live. And of course, it's sitting there on a small little patch of ice, wondering, how it's going to probably be get his food, et cetera. You see panda bears. I mean, pandas should be in snow and ice and should have lots of lush vegetation around them. And of course, you see the vegetation there is dry and brittle. And so these are some of the things that are affecting the wildlife because of climate change. Now we're going to talk about, that was probably, hopefully, a good view of kind of what's happening and what's climate change and what are the effects. Now we're going to talk about what people are doing about it, because that's really what this is all about, is how can we all, as this just small community right now, affect change? Because it really does start with you. It starts with one person saying, I'm going to make a change today. And so, this is a picture here of a number of the world leaders who came together in something called COP21, which is in Paris, a few months back. And, COP is the Conference of the Parties, and it is an annual climate conference where all the world leaders come together and try and basically hammer out a deal whereby everybody can cooperate for the greater good of the planet. And so it was a pretty monumental meeting in Paris, whereby there was a binding agreement signed, still has to be ratified, but it looks like it will get ratified, whereby the world leaders made some pretty profound commitments to making sure that the global temperature doesn't rise above 2 degrees Celsius. So if you think about, so here's an interesting chart, and what this is depicting on the left side is all of some of the countries, obviously, and their greenhouse gas emissions from a country level, the absolute emission levels. And so if you look at, Canada there is 2% of all global emissions come from Canada. Obviously, the US and China are the very large emitters. And most of the COP meetings have always turned on whether or not China and US will agree on some binding ratification of a deal. What I think is probably more important, though, and it's probably something where, all of us here in Canada and all of you watching, wherever you're watching, can really affect change. And the right-hand side is on a per capita basis, what is our emission level? So this is on a per person. So everybody here in this room, you'll see Canada is the third worst polluter in the world. And that's not something to be very proud of. But what it is a chance to change. And that's what this is all about today, is changing our habits, changing our behaviors in order to affect monumental and profound change around the world. And so if you look at the per capita basis, you have Australia, USA, and Canada as the highest per capita emitters. But just talk back about COP21. These are some of the initiatives that all the world leaders agreed to in COP21 in order to keep that global temperature at 2 degrees or lower. And so some of the real highlights here is that $13.5 trillion will be invested in energy efficiency and low carbon technologies between 2015 and 2030. And so the question is how much or how big is $13.5 trillion? And just to give you some sense of the scale and the quantum of that is the GDP of both China and Japan in 2014, two of the largest economies in the entire world. That's how much money is going to be invested in the next 15 years in just energy efficiency and low carbon technologies, which is an amazing amount. The other piece is that there's the annual average of $840 billion being invested into renewables. And so what does that really mean? So the entire energy business, okay, $840 billion would represent 40% of all total energy sector spending on an annual basis is going to be put into the renewable sector, which is a profound amount. So what is 840 billion? Just to give you some relevance here, that's the GDP of the Netherlands in 2014. So the GDP of an entire country is going to be spent every single year in renewables for the next 15 years. And the other piece is that the International Energy Association believes that 60% of total power generation capacity will be directed towards renewable energies at a clip of about $4 trillion in wind and solar, which is, of course, $4 trillion is the GDP of California and Texas in 2014, two of the biggest states in the US. So just to give you some perspective of really what happened in Paris at COP21 and some of the things that the world leaders have committed to, it's a profound investment that will make monumental change in the world over the next 15 years. So here are some of the specialized areas, if you will, that really contribute to combating and fighting climate change. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot more about renewable energy here in a little bit. You've got low carbon homes, which we will also talk about. You've got sustainable forestry activities and sustainable agriculture, being no-till and low-till. You've got ground source heat pumps. You've got bicycles. You can see people now much more in big cities like Toronto, where people are riding their bicycle as opposed to taking cars, or they're sharing cars. You can see EV charging stations popping up everywhere. So the electrical vehicles. You can see obviously hybrid and biogas, hydrogen buses, and low carbon businesses and industries, which means really kind of net zero, net positive buildings. And you see that happening right here in certainly Ontario Toronto, in a place like London, which we'll talk about a bit. And you're seeing that all over the world, where the advent of smart cities is happening everywhere. Here's an interesting little picture, if you will. So, of course, the African proverb says the gazelle does not have to outrun the cheetah. It has to outrun the slowest gazelle. And if you think about kind of the evolution of change that we're seeing in the energy sector, you see coal today as being the slowest gazelle. And, Ontario, as one example, is completely off coal now. They announced that a number of years back. And Alberta has just announced that they're going to take their entire grid off coal. And what happens is, and why that's so important is most of these provinces, states, countries, once they make the decision to get off of coal, they always replace it with renewables. And that's the sign of a progressive, again, country, state, or province. That's typically what you'll see is we're gonna phase out coal over the next 5 to 10 years, and most, if not all, of that generation that's going to take its place is going to be some type of renewable energy. You then have the oil sands, which is in a very interesting place right now, given the price of oil, and the view of the oil sands around the world is that they need to be more environmentally friendly. And then you've got oil and gas, which are still increasing in their energy production around the world. But I think what you'll see in a couple of charts here that I have over the next couple of slides is that clean energy is monumentally taking up all of the coal resources, and it's in a rapid advancement today. So here's something from The Economist, which is a magazine that is read around the world. And it's really, if you think about kind of oil and gas, this is what's happening is you've got the U.S., which is, there's a lot of fracking happening, which is something we can certainly talk a lot about. But the gas coming out of the U.S. is significant. And then you've got obviously OPEC and some of the Arab countries who are still supplying a lot of the oil to the entire world. And it's a big fight between those two countries and those two technologies, oil and gas. So let's now really turn to the solution. And so Thomas Edison, hopefully you've all heard of him. Hopefully you're all taught about who Thomas Edison is. Here's what he said in 1931. So 1931, I would venture to say there was very, very little solar energy being used in the world. But here's what somebody who is probably one of the greatest minds ever in this world said about solar energy. So he said, I'd put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. I hope we don't have to wait until oil and coal run out before we tackle that. I wish I had more years left. And I think this is really a profound statement and a profound quote from one of the biggest leaders we've ever seen in the entire world. And what he says is absolutely true. And I think you're now seeing it globally, that people are making change before you actually run out of oil or coal. We're actually now revolutionizing the energy industry with solar and with wind. And so let's talk about 2014. So here's what happened. The entire energy business, 77% of energy globally was on fossil fuels and nuclear energy, and 22% was on renewable energy. So of the 22% of renewables, about 16.5% was hydropower, about 3% was wind, there was some biopower. Solar was less than 1% of all energy at the end of 2014. And then some geothermal and CSP and other clean energies. So that's an interesting chart. If you think about especially the solar PV being at 1%, because I think what you'll see in the next couple of slides is the profound growth that we're all going to see around the world around solar PV. So here is renewable energy as a proportion of power generation in 2040. Okay, so this is in 25 years. Okay, what is the mix of renewable energy on a percentage basis going to look like in all these different countries? So US is going to be 24% of all power generation will be renewables. Germany is 77%, which has been the absolute leader in renewable energy throughout the world over the last 10, 15 years. A place like Australia is more than half of their energy will come from renewable sources. And today, Australia is one of the largest polluters on a per capita basis. And so that's very encouraging that the entire economy and country is going to switch. A place like Mexico, which has a lot of oil and gas, is going to be 32% renewable energy by 2040. So these are estimates. And I would say this is kind of base case estimates. There is a big opportunity here to take these charts and these percentages and make them a lot bigger. And the only way that's going to happen is for folks like yourselves who really want to create change in this world to actually create that change. So there's a big saying that says, be the change you want to see. And so that's really the opportunity here. But it's a pretty profound shift in power generation over the next 25 years. So what is solar? Let's talk about solar right now. So how does solar work? Basically, you've got the sun's rays hitting a solar panel. The solar panel is either on the roof or on the ground, and that solar energy is direct current, and it travels through electrical wires to something called an inverter, and the inverter inverts the energy, if you will, from DC current to alternating current, and then the alternating current is usable power, which goes into your panel at the house, and then all the appliances and plugs can use that AC power. So solar energy is very simple. There's not a lot of moving parts. You've got panels that are on a roof or on a ground. Literally, they don't move for the most part. They have to be cleaned, depending on where you are, either every 6 months or every month, again, depending on where you are. But that's it. And the lifetime of those assets are 20 to 40 years of those panels. So that's the thing I like about solar, is that it's simple and it's scalable. And so we talked a bit, a few slides before about the growth of solar. So again, today, remember, it's less than 1% of all power generation. And this gets to kind of what is the opportunity in solar. So over the next 25 years, you're going to see about 3.7 terawatts of solar come online, which is basically a 20% annual growth over the next 25 years, which is profound. And that is going to be trillions and trillions of dollars of investment into just solar around the world. And that is the big opportunity here. So we're going to talk a bit about now AMP. And so AMP started about 6.5 years ago with a view to really focus on what we believe was the profound shift that was going to happen around fossil fuels versus renewables, and specifically around solar. And so what we do is we develop and own and manage solar assets all over the world today. We operate in not only Ontario, Canada, but also in the US, in the UK, England, in Japan, Thailand, in India, and in places like Jordan. And so that's where we operate. That's what we do. We develop and own solar assets. We're going to talk about some of the interesting projects. So here's a quick snapshot of what we've done. We've built about 420 megawatts, which, to give some context of that, that's over $1 billion that we have invested into solar assets over the last 6 years. Some of our partners that you guys will all recognize are companies like Ikea, companies like Royal Bank, TD Bank, Canadian Tire, certainly for the Canadians here. Those are some of our customers and our partners where we have installed solar on their rooftops, or where we have built big, large solar ground mount projects, and they've invested alongside us. So here is just a quick snapshot of, again, where we operate, as I mentioned earlier, but also just to give you some perspective of what does 420 megawatts really mean. It means that the equivalent of planting 3 million trees and the equivalent of avoided CO2 on an annual basis of 600 million pounds of CO2. And this year we will build 400 megawatts. And so again, another 400 megawatts is the equivalent of planting another 2.9 million trees just this year. And again, incrementally to that, to another annual CO2 equivalent 571 million pounds. And so it's, one of the things that's interesting is we started with one panel, right? And now we've installed millions of panels. And so every single year, the avoided CO2, which is really the measure of greenhouse gas, is increasing in a significant way just in our small company of AmpSolar Group, that's headquartered here in Ontario. And there's hundreds and thousands of small businesses that are starting today that will have that same impact for climate change. Let's talk, we're sitting here at a school in Oakville, and I thought it would be important to talk about some of the school projects that we've undertaken. We have built about 600 individual school projects. And so I think we've got a lot of experience with schools, and they're very, very exciting projects. And so this one is, you see a picture of a bunch of school buses and some panels on a roof. And this is in a school in York region, which is just north of Toronto. And so we built a portfolio of projects on 83 different schools in the Waterloo, York, and Simcoe County District School Boards. And this is a picture of one of them. I'm going to talk about the Toronto District School Board, which is certainly has been our largest project to date from a rooftop solar standpoint. And so what we did is the Toronto School Board has about 523 schools, and they had a problem, and their problem was a crumbling roofing infrastructure. And so a lot of the roofs, like many of the schools that you see, had holes in the roofs, and it was tough to maintain. There wasn't enough capital to fix the roofs on an annual basis. And so what we did is we went to the Toronto District School Board and said, we will fix 10 million square feet of roof space if you let us put solar on each of your schools and sell that energy back to the grid. And so what that did for the school board was it put about $100 million into their capital budget, and to fix a crumbling infrastructure called roofs, which is quite important in Toronto because of the snow load. You had a lot of roofs that were leaking, you had a lot of buckets on the hallways. And so that project was at the time the largest distributed generation or rooftop solar project announced in North America. And it's made a profound impact on the students, the teachers, and the entire community of the TDSB. Here are some other pictures of some of the schools. So you'll see, we basically put solar on the entire rooftop of these schools, outside of where there's some heating and ventilation equipment. And the other thing that we do is in the schools where there's solar energy on the roof, we'll have displays in each of the lobbies of each of the schools to talk about, here's the solar energy that's being produced today from this specific school. And here are the equivalent number of trees being planted. Here's the equivalent liters of water being saved, the equivalent methane that's being reduced in the atmosphere. And so that is happening across, and you're going to see this happening more and more and more as schools and school boards get more innovative around using solar to power their own schools or during a feed-in tariff program. So you'll see, again, these are just some various snapshots of some of the displays that are in the lobbies of each of these schools. We want to talk about this project, which is something that we've just finished in the last couple of months. And, obviously we're sitting in Oakville. This is the new Oakville Hospital. And this is a parking canopy. And it's a very big parking canopy. And if you look at it, if you're wondering what you're looking at, the entire roof of that parking garage is built with solar. And underneath it is LED lighting. And so this is something that you're going to see more and more of as solar becomes much more prevalent in the way that buildings are built, and all of the architects and builders are looking at solar as actually being, like in this example, a rooftop. Here's another example of some of our projects. This is the Ikea, who I'm sure everyone here has been to Ikea and eaten their great meatballs. But this is one of the Ikeas in Toronto. So every Ikea store in the Ontario region we put solar on, and you'll see that we've covered about half of the roof of the Ikea building here. Those of you who are Canadian will notice this is a Canadian Tire building, and again we've put solar on a number of Canadian Tire buildings in Ontario. And as you can see, we've tried to use every available space on the roof where there's no shading to put solar on it. So this is an interesting project. So solar is really rooftop solar, or as I mentioned earlier, ground mount solar, utility scale. So this is a solar power plant, which you're looking at right there. And that's in Sunderland, Ontario, just a couple hours north of Toronto. And the total area is 58 acres. And so we put solar panels on 58 acres. And that's a $50 million project that you're looking at right now, and the equivalent of 100,000 planted trees. There's another ground mount project, which is in Napanee, Ontario, which is east of Toronto. And this is about 56 acres. It costs about $40 million, and about 80,000 equivalent planted trees are displaced because of the solar energy. We also, as I mentioned, operate in the UK. And so here's just some pictures from the UK. We've built and or financed about 50,000 individual projects. We do a lot of residential solar in the UK, where we've put 3 kilowatt systems on tens of thousands of homes in the UK, as well as built large ground mount projects like you see in this picture. We're very active in India, and if you go to India, and some of you probably have, or if you're from India listening to this, there's a lot of air quality issues and smog in India. And so we are trying to, along with a lot of other companies in India, really affect monumental change in that country and install a lot of solar in the country. We're very excited about what we're doing in India. The next slide here, you'll see Prime Minister Modi, who has been in power for just over a year now in India. And we've had the opportunity to meet Prime Minister Modi, and he is very, very passionate, probably the most passionate leader I've ever met around building an economy with solar energy in his country. And he's committed to 100 gigawatts of solar in India over the next 7 years, which is an amazing, amazing goal. And I think he's going to achieve it. And then the other things are so those are the things that AMP Solar is doing. And the other project that I'll talk about before we get into recycling is we are also building what's called net zero communities. And so with a couple of partners, we have purchased about 150 acres in London, Ontario, again, along with our partners. And we are building a net zero community with a couple hundred townhomes, 500,000 square feet of commercial space, whereby the energy that's used in that community is as much as it generates itself, which is basically the definition of a net zero community. So there's going to be solar on each and every single townhome. There's going to be micro storage in each and every townhouse. There's going to be solar and storage in commercial spaces. There's going to be EV charging stations. There's going to be heat pumps. There's going to be green appliances. And so AMP, in conjunction with our partners, we're going to own all of that energy infrastructure and clean energy infrastructure and ensure that it's managed and maintained properly. And so that is the first smart community in Canada in that scale. And we're going to be building a number of those throughout Canada and throughout the world. We're working on a couple in Southeast Asia, some in India, some in the US. And that is really an amazing opportunity to really affect monumental change. As far as what can we do here, as an individual, recycling, we've talked about recycling here in Canada for many, many years. And it's actually quite interesting that when I travel, I travel quite a bit, there's a lot of countries and a lot of states and a lot of cities that don't even recycle yet. And recycling does affect a lot of change, and it's something that each and every one of us can do. And so if you look at that, just a couple of simple facts. Just to produce each week's Sunday newspaper, 500,000 trees must be cut down, right? And if all the newspapers were, 50,000 trees, if all the newspapers were recycled, we would save 250 million trees each and every year, right? And so recycling does make an impact, a profound impact in this world. There's a number of other things you can do around showers and the reduction of our intake of beef. You'll see the funny thing, I just stepped on a cornflake. Now I'm officially a serial killer. The waste of food is unfortunately pretty sad in a country like Canada and like the US, where there's a lot of food, a lot of food wasters, if you will. And so we just need to be mindful as individuals of what we can do on an everyday basis to affect change. As far as our carbon footprint, you hear that a lot. I would say that, you look at this, there's basically 3 feet. One is the estimated average of a U.S. U.S. citizen, which is about 20 metric tons. That's the carbon footprint. And then we've also said, even a homeless person in the U.S. has a very large footprint of 8.5 metric tons. And then the average for the world is about 4 metric tons. So if you think about that step change that's got to happen and that impact has to happen around the world, it is pretty profound, and we need to always encourage and help everybody. And it starts with everyone here in this hangout to affect change yourself first. So obviously the key point here and the key message is that change is happening and more change is needed. And I hope you'll take up the challenge to actually create the challenge that you want and the change that you want. And so we're just going to end off with a bit of a video here. And just give us 2 seconds while we load it up.
So it's on. Go in here.
Okay.
Go in here. Where's it at? I'll go over. We gotta go over because it's.
We'll get there.
There. I guess we click it and play.
One day, we will wake up to find that the energy that powers the alarm clock came from the breeze through the trees the night before.
There it is.
And we will go to work that morning riding the rays of the sun. It will light our cities and power our businesses. It will warm our homes and cool our workplaces. It will reduce sources of conflict and fuel our economy. It will connect us all. It won't scar the land or poison the seas.
I'm sorry about this.
No, it's okay.
The food we eat will be good for our bodies and good for the planet. And the weather that day won't make us worry for tomorrow. There will be more jobs and less disease. The sea level will stop rising. And species will stop dying. The question is, how do we get to that day from where we are today? All 7.3 billion of us.
It's too late now. Sorry.
We start by deciding that beyond our doubts and differences, such a day truly exists. And that is something each of us can do today. We can make today the day we stop thinking that the changes required to get there are impossible and beyond us, and start realizing that they are not only possible, but what the future requires of us. We must stop turning from the warnings of science and fear and denial, and instead turn toward the solutions and partnerships we need. We can make today the day we stop pointing at each other in blame, and instead chart a new course together.
Okay.
We have never faced a crisis this big, but we have never had a better opportunity to solve it. We have everything we need to wake up to a different kind of world. We need our leaders to be brave and their choices to be bold. They will either remember us as the generation that destroyed its home, or the one that finally came to respect it. We have every reason in the world to act. We can't wait until tomorrow.
Okay, so let's do this here.
This is our only home. You can choose today to make a world of difference.
So right here. Yeah, there we go. Beautiful. Oh, shoot, we gotta turn that off. Okay, good.
All right, folks, with that, we're done. What I recommend and encourage you all to do, because I don't know that you saw that video, is to go on YouTube and just make a simple search of Morgan Freeman climate change. And it's a moving video that I recommend you all.
UN Secretary General, President of the General Assembly, Executive Director of UN Women, and distinguished guests. Today, we are launching a campaign called He for She. I am reaching out to you because we need your help. We want to end gender inequality. And to do this, we need...
Sorry.
That's okay. There we go. Back. Anyway, thank you all for your time and today, and thank you for being part of this community. I think it's an amazing initiative, and I really and I'm proud to be associated with it. I'm proud to know Steve Morrison and thank him for the invite, and I'm proud to share a little bit about kind of what we're doing at AmpSolar Group, and the entire employee base at AmpSolar Group is proud to be helping with fight the problem. So with that, thank you so much, and have a great rest of the Hangout.